Well, a light-hearted introduction. A month ago, I was on holiday in Italy, and over breakfast I picked up a copy of La Repubblica. And there, at the top of the page, was a very large story about Il Professore Rix, who had recently been elected Professor of Poetry at Oxford. And it struck me that academics don't often get written about even in their own country. So here was something pretty stupendous, and it made me reflect on this occasion, which I knew was coming. I'd like to say that La Repubblica announced that Professor Rix was particularly interested in William Barnes, but I'm afraid it didn't. It mentioned somebody quite different, Bob Dylan, but I believe he's not going to talk about Bob Dylan this evening. I do think the committee of the Royal Society of Literature is to be congratulated on their prescience in having asked Professor Rix before the Oxford election. And I feel certainly a tremendous sense of delight and honour in introducing him. 31 years ago, I went to a series of lectures at University College London on Keats and embarrassment. And there is no doubt they were some of the most brilliant lectures I've ever heard, and they were, of course, given by Christopher, if I may call him Christopher. They had a precision, an elegance, a good sense, a close attention to the text. They kept all the audience in a state of intellectual exhilaration throughout the whole series of the lectures. I think that makes me absolutely confident that this evening we will get to that same high level of talk. During the course of the recent Oxford election, I noticed one journalist referred to Christopher as an uncuddly critic. I thought how delighted he must have been not to be called cuddly. I suppose you might say Coleridge had a cuddly appearance, but actually cuddliness is not what you want from a critic. And what you get from Christopher is ferocity, I would say, brilliance. A friend of mine published his first book and got a letter from Christopher congratulating him on it and appending a list of something like 70 mistakes made in it. Now, there's ferocity for you, but the friend remained a friend because it's ferocity in the right cause. When he was talking about Keats, he said he wasn't going to, but I've checked looking at the printed book, Keats and Embarrassment, that he wasn't going to talk about Keats's psyche, but address himself to the special goodness of the man and considering the special goodness of the man and the special goodness that made him a good poet. And I suppose that may be part of his approach to William Barnes tonight. William Barnes is not perhaps a very popular English poet. He lived for 85 years in Dorset from 1801 to 1886, and he wrote many of his poems in the dialect. You can see his statue in the centre of Dorchester, venerable old man with a beard and knee breeches, and he looks perhaps a bit remote, but he is a wonderful poet, and he's a poet's poet. He was greatly admired by Tennyson, by Hardy, whom he was sort of mentor to Hardy in a way, in other ways not, by W.H. Auden and by Philip Larkin. What I feel about Barnes is that he addressed himself to the pleasures, the Arcadian pleasures of life. He knew about the pleasure of the word. His poems are wonderfully constructed. And he also knew a great deal about discomfort, bereavement, need, sorrow, and he wrote some quite indignant poems about the conditions of the people of Dorset. Well, you don't want to hear what I think about William Barnes, you want to hear what Christopher thinks about William Barnes. So it is a great pleasure and delight to me to introduce Professor Christopher Rix.
When Mrs. T.S. Eliot set up this series of annual lectures, it was with the hope that her husband's memory would be honoured, as I gather it was last year, by a lecture directly on Eliot's work. The letter inviting me this year to speak asked that I speak on an author or subject that might have interested him. We know that William Barnes did interest Eliot, in that William Turner Levy, an American friend of Eliot's, sent him a book on Barnes, and to this Eliot replied, "I read it myself there having to do with the publishing house. I read it myself with both enjoyment and profit, coming to it as a reader with no previous acquaintance with Barnes's work. I must say I found the book interesting and well written, and the quotations, which are plentiful, extremely helpful. Indeed, they gave me a much higher impression of Barnes as a poet than I had expected to receive. His poetry is also interesting because it seems to me that he must have had a considerable influence on Thomas Hardy. I am not a particular admirer of Hardy myself, and I therefore find I like some of Barnes's poems, as you quote them, more than anything I have read of Hardy's. This does not mean, of course, that I regard him as a better poet than Hardy. I don't think he is, but simply that I find him more congenial, and I was impressed also by the technical achievement of some of his verse forms. Eliot's hostility to Hardy's poetry remains a mystery to me. I think it a pity that he didn't elaborate the arguments against Hardy that he formulated in After Strange Gods, so that they would more take in the poetry. You may remember that he said in the Criterion in 1935, "It should be apparent at least that Mr. Yeats has been the great poet of his time. Thomas Hardy, who for a few years had all the cry, appears now what he always was, a minor poet." And this feels to me a perverse judgment, and one that I would have wished to see elaborated, as perverse judgments always should be. Now, the piety towards Mr. Eliot on this occasion, I would like to join with the piety towards Bernard Jones, whose edition of William Barnes is indispensable, and who died 3 months ago. His widow, Frances Austin Jones, let many of us know of the death of Bernard Jones, and I would like particularly to remember him on this occasion. And I read now The Hill Shade. At such a time of year and day, in ages gone, that steep hill brow cast down an evening shade, that lay in shape the same as lies there now, though then no shadows wheeled around the things that now are on the ground. The hill's high shape may long outstand the house of slowly wasting stone. The house may longer shade the land than man's on-gliding shade is shown. The man himself may longer stay than stands the summer's rick of hay. The trees that rise with boughs o'er boughs, to me for trees long fallen may pass, and I could take those red-haired cows for those that pulled my first known grass. Our flowers seem yet on ground and spray, but oh, our people, where are they? It seems to me an extraordinarily moving poem. It is alive, of course, in subsequent poetry, since Ezra Pound was right to say that the most important form of criticism is subsequent creation. That there is no more important criticism of a poet than what a later poet makes of his or her work, so that what Barnes became in Hardy, so alike and so unlike, what Barnes became in Larkin, so like and so unlike, and what Barnes has become recently in Geoffrey Hill, where the likeness to a poet like Barnes might seem to be predicted as minimal. So here from Geoffrey Hill, from the Orchards of Zion. All along I'm labouring to try out a numen that endures exactly placed. Some upper valley in the high fell country, where millstone grit juts against limestone, shippons built of random masonry, the home croft with its gapped wall and its well, and black nettles where the privy stood. Ivy and other evergreens in profusion, most notably when it's winter. Yet Hardy's redoubtable friend asked, "Our people, where are they? Cranky old barns, but oh, our people, where are they?" And I could not answer, but left him there in silence. And the poem does not leave us there in silence because it moves to further natural description. And one of the things that Hill has done in this subsequent creation that is itself criticism is stress the lines differently. Our people, where are they? Cranky old barns, but oh, our people, where are they? That is, he's used diacritical marks to bring this home, and I myself think it a pity that Geoffrey Hill's recent work needs diacritical marks as his earlier work did not. Nevertheless, he is making, I think, a genuine imaginative point about the hiding places of power in the poem by Barnes. I want to talk about crisis, and crisis is a word that these days is very much overused. I was at a summer school 2 weeks ago, and the question was, is there a crisis in education? I think we should revert to the strong original sense of crisis, where the medical sense precedes both the astrological sense and the transferred sense, which is now the one that we mostly have. Pathological, the point in the progress of a disease when an important development or change takes place which is decisive of recovery or death. Now, you are not for education going to have either recovery or death. These are inconceivable as possibilities. There is therefore not a crisis in education. It's not clear what recovery could possibly mean. Unfortunately, it is inconceivable that education in this country would die, however degenerated it might have become. The word crisis derives, I learned from the dictionary, from discrimination, decision, and the word these senses are now obsolete, meant judgment and decision, or a point by which to judge. And in this sense, of course, every moment in a poem is decisive. At every moment in a poem, some decision is taken which will affect the recovery or the death or the life of the poem itself. But what I want to suggest today is that a particular question arises when recovery, put it this way rather, when death is seen as itself a form of recovery. Now, for Barnes, it's a form of recovery in that death recovers the eternal life, which is far more important in its very being than any transitory sublunary life. However much he cares for the life of his day and of his family, eternal life is that which the poems regularly turn to, and Barnes sees all of life under a religious aspect. I speak as somebody entirely without religious feeling, and one of the reasons why I'm grateful to William Barnes is his reminder to me of the truth of William Empson's point that one of the reasons why we have art is to give us access, sympathetic access, to systems of belief that are not our own. So that Barnes, for me, enjoys the particular respect in which I hold George Herbert for bringing it home to me that Empson is not right in maintaining simply that Christianity is a loathsome system of torture worship. Now, I am myself against Christianity and would rather people did not believe in it. But it is good for me, as it was good for Empson when reading George Herbert, to find that he, to his surprise, to his wonder, is brought into sympathetic relationship to something which he would have thought was beyond his sympathetic apprehension. Well, death as recovery for Barnes will be eternal life and the truths of Christianity. For Hardy, it will be peace eternal. That is, death is the recovery of that condition which should never have been changed for us. It is better to be dead than alive, best of all never to have been born. And Randall Jarrell, you may remember, says a Greek poet, widely advertised as seeing life steadily and seeing it whole. So if the chorus in a Greek tragedy can say it would be better for you never to have been born, why does it seem absurd or melodramatic of Hardy to maintain such a proposition? So I'm interested in the way in which death and recovery, far from being alternatives, are sometimes one the condition of the other, if you see life as these two poets do. One further point about the word crisis. It matters hugely, I think, that there is no verb in the vicinity of crisis. We have no verb which will relate to the noun and the adjective which we are given. There is nothing. You have to go into bring about a crisis, establish that there is a crisis. You haven't got a verb that will operate there. And that's partly, I think, because of the difficulty of deciding upon the exact now that is crisis. I'm going to read The Storm Wind. These poems, except when I tell you that they're not, are on the sheet. So here's The Storm Wind. It is, I think, a deeply happy poem, partly because it understands the unhappiness which threatens it. The Storm Wind. When the swift-rolling brook, swollen deep, rushes on by the alders full speed, and the wild-blowing winds lowly sweep o'er the quivering leaf and the weed, and the willow tree writhes in each limb over sedge reeds that reel by the brim, the man that is staggering by holds his hat to his head by the brim, and the girl, as her hair locks outfly, puts a foot out to keep herself trim, and the quivering wavelings o'erspread the small pool where the bird dips his head. But out at my house, in the lee of the nook where the winds die away, the light-swimming airs round the tree and the low-swinging ivy stem play so soft that a mother that's nigh her still cradle may hear her babe sigh. Now, it is, I think, a recreation of Lucretius. It's a recreation of what, in Dryden's translation of the beginning of the second book of Lucretius, Suave Mari Magno, goes like this. "'Tis pleasant safely to behold from shore the rolling ship and hear the tempest roar. Not that another's pain is our delight, but pains unfelt produce the pleasing sight." The Barnes poem is about the difference between how limbs are writhing, how people are being buffeted, though not fortunately to tragic or melodramatic outcome. The contrast with that, it is benign gloating. It's a particularly difficult effect to pull off. That is, gloating has something malign in it, but out at my house, in the lee of the nook, lucky old you is part of what you're to think at this point. But of course the whole of the last verse is coloured by the possibility of tragedy. Play so soft that a mother that's nigh her still cradle may hear her babe sigh. That sigh could be terrifically easily the feeling that the mother is moved to do, isn't that right? The sighing of the mother in bereavement. There are so many dead children in the real world of Barnes and in the world of his poems and in the world of so many of his contemporaries. So what you have at the end, I think, is a premonition of a certain kind of sadness, which is very, very beautifully held off. The but is decisive of recovery or death. Death, I think, is invoked through it, but then that sigh turns out to be the kind of adorable small sound that a child's breathing is, and you can listen for the breathing, and it is there. Child death, so known to him. The word schadenfreude, you may remember, the Oxford English Dictionary, malicious enjoyment of other people's difficulties or losses, damage joy, with the Spectator in 1926 saying, there is no English word for schadenfreude because there is no such feeling here. That reminds me of Geoffrey Hill's decision to take out of italics the word voyeur in one of his poems and to have it be Roman, not italics. Because if God is the voyeur of sacrifice, he sounds sort of French, and the English needn't worry too much. We like calling it voyeurism because that suggests it's not what goes on for us, isn't that right? There's some kind of, it's the old Europe, I'm afraid. So, there is an extraordinary intelligence, I think, in the Barnes poem, and I want to say something about intelligence, and quote Eliot's remark, intelligence of which an important function is the discernment of exactly what and how much we feel in any given situation. Eliot believes that it is much harder to know exactly what and how much you feel than you might think. You often say, I don't know what I think. Actually, most of the time you don't know what you feel. And Eliot's detestation of newspapers has to do with his belief that they are above all the creator of what, in writing about Stendhal, Eliot calls human illusions of feeling. Stendhal, he says, is a positive humiliation to read in his understanding of human feelings and human illusions of feeling. that are forced on the reader. One argument against Eliot would be that human illusions of feeling too much occupy his mind and heart, that his sensitivity to them is very, very remarkable, but that as with the boredom, the horror and the glory, the boredom and the horror are less realized by him in his work than is the glory. It's not, I think, that there is a malicious pleasure in human illusions of feeling, but you could sometimes feel that, well, one's gratitude for a poem like Marina will have something to do with the feeling that its relation to feeling is so different from what generally prevails in Eliot. Hardy is, of course, fascinated, perhaps to the point of obsession, with human illusions of feeling. The terrible thing that the satires of circumstance turn to all the time is the sincerity of the inauthenticity of what people are believing. That is, they could, with a clear conscience, look you in the eye and assure you that they are feeling these things, but you cannot believe it. Something has gone terribly wrong in the relation of feeling to illusion. Barnes is the true voice of feeling, that phrase from Keats. I don't think that he ever gives us illusions of feeling, but nor by the same token does he ever dramatize the terrible thing that is human illusion of feeling. So there are kinds of greatness of apprehension that I feel in other poetry that I don't feel in him, which limit him, though they don't vitiate him at all. William Empson, if I come back to the question of how intelligence functions in relation to feeling, Empson in 1930, when he's in his early 20s, reviewing for Eliot's journal, The Criterion, writing about the metaphysical foundations of modern science, protests that the writer, E.A. Burt, misrepresents Aristotle and Copernicus. Aristotle himself produced the argument about parallaxes, and Copernicus overrode it. I find this a pleasing historical fact because it shows that both of these great men were more intelligent, less at the mercy of their own notions than Mr. Burt wishes to think them. Wishes to think them is a good point about how we score off our predecessors. Not that he thinks them, he wishes to think them. And this extraordinary passing description, not definition, but description of intelligence, more intelligent, less at the mercy of their own notions. It's very optimistic in the Empson manner. The thought is that we all teem with notions. The only problem is that sometimes we are at their mercy, as against those days when you don't have a notion at all. The danger is not that you're going to be at the mercy of some notion, it's that you can't think of a notion at all to carry you through. Mercy is crucial to Barnes, as mercilessness is crucial to Hardy. They divide, I think, and the danger in Barnes's kind of poetry is that he will be at the mercy of the idea that mercy is everywhere available, that mercy can be counted upon, such is his faith. The danger for Hardy is the opposite one, of not a benign gloating, but a malign gloating at the mercilessness of the spirit. Ironical, even the convergence of the twain, I think, is damaged by its creator's relation to his creation. There is more of a parallel between what the Titanic was and what the poem is than Hardy would have wished, I think. But for both of them, there is this question of recovery and death, and, of course, not being a slave to things. Hardy thinks that it was dialects that protected Barnes against being a slave to certain easinesses of feeling, a slave to the passion for form. He was saved by the conditions of his scene, characters, and vocabulary. And Hardy says that he saw this tendency in himself and adopted dialect as some kind of, this is my word, not Hardy's, some kind of prophylaxis against sentimentalities. That's not to say that there could ever be, of course, a complete prophylaxis against sentimentalities, but it would operate to some degree as such. Eliot, I go back to a famous remark of his, Eliot saying of the function of a literary review that it must maintain the autonomy and disinterestedness of literature and at the same time exhibit the relations of literature not to life as something contrasted to literature, but to all the other activities which together with literature are the components of life. complicated sentence, though not, I think, an elusive one. Do not contrast literature and life, because literature is just as much a part of life as anything else. Contrast literature with all the other things which together with literature make up life, and one of those is, of course, death. Hardy's poem, The Voice, which you know and which I shall not now read to you, is a poem which crucially uses the word of crisis, the word now, and the terrific wish that there would be a now that would be fixed so that you could determine crisis. You could determine the moment which would be constitutive of recovery or death. The shapings in these poets, of course, always demand tact in their creator and in their receiver, us as readers. We hate poetry that has a palpable design upon us, Keats says, and I want to point to elements in the designing of the poem which I think, by highlighting, I'm in danger of making tactless in ways that they are not if we simply receive the poem, so that it's the danger of all literary criticism that will draw attention to things which one then needs, as it were, to cease to attend to in receiving the poem anew. Eliot, we cannot say at what point technique begins or where it ends. We have to use the word, but we have to know that to say of Glenn Gould's performance later of that same piece of music that it is technically describable, as it is by a musicologist, is not to say that what it comes to is a technical, leave alone a merely technical difference. At what point does crisis begin? I'll read a Hardy poem. This is not on the sheet. It's a poem about the question of when recovery, or the alternative to recovery, a terrible death, really crystallizes. This is The Dead Man Walking. Quite different effect from the title of the film, isn't it? To put the article before Dead Man Walking is to change everything about it, it seems to me. The Dead Man Walking. They hail me as one living, but don't they know that I have died of late years, untombed although? I am but a shape that stands here, a pulseless mould, a pale past picture screening ashes gone cold. Not at a minute's warning, not in a loud hour, for me ceased time's enchantments in hall and bower. There was no tragic transit, no catch of breath, when silent seasons inched me on to this death. A troubadour youth, I rambled with life for lyre, the beats of being raging in me like fire. But when I practised eyeing the goal of men, it iced me, and I perished a little then. When passed my friend, my kinsfolk, through the last door, and left me standing bleakly, I died yet more. And when my love's heart kindled in hate of me, wherefore I knew not, died I one more degree. And if when I died fully I cannot say, and changed into the corpse thing I am today, yet is it that, though whiling the time somehow in walking, talking, smiling, I live not now. That last line is, I think, wonderfully equivocal, isn't it? I live not now. It holds open the possibility that though not now to live, there will be some time. It glimpses the possibility that for Barnes would be consolatory, and for Hardy, I think, would not. I think there is a longing for oblivion in him of the kind that Larkin also has and writes very beautifully about. So I'm mentioning Hardy a good deal for I think, obvious and I hope honourable reasons. Hardy, in the Apology to Late Lyrics and Earlier, quotes Wordsworth on the formal engagement that the poet makes with his readers, and then says what the truly literary question is. Should a shaper of such stuff as dreams are made on disregard considerations of what is customary and expected? Should he disregard considerations of what is customary and expected? And the answer, I take it, has to be yes and no. That is, he has to disregard them, provided that that is a conscious decision of the kind that ignoring is. It's a very strange thing about ignoring, that you cannot ignore that of which you are ignorant. If I was ignorant of your being here, I cannot ignore you. I can only ignore you if I know that you are there, as I can't cut you in the street, isn't that right? These people, there are certain people I cut, and I hope you do this too. There are certain people who should not be socially existent for us. I said to a colleague of mine at Boston University that I was no longer on speaking terms with Roger Scruton. He then said to me, he bridled at this, not because he has, as far as I know, any affection for Scruton, but simply because he thought that one should be on speaking terms with everybody. And I said, has nobody ever done something which you really think would make you not want to speak to him again? I had in mind a particular review of this man's book, published in an organ of which I am the book review editor. I said to my colleague, has nobody ever? And he said, well, I suppose they have, but it would not make me wish to strike them off the list of my interlocutors. And at that point I thought, anybody who says strike me off the list of my interlocutors is somebody I don't want to be on speaking terms with, isn't that right? Just something about that, I mean, the amazing ripe complacency of the formulation and so on. Should you disregard? Yes, to disregard, you can only disregard them if they have entered your regard. You have regarded them, and you should then set them aside, provided there are real gains. So expectations, think of the expectations of a refrain. This is Home from a Journey. I'm giving you, in large part, an anthology. Home from a Journey. Back home on my mare, I took my way through hour upon hour of waning day, where thistles on windy ledges shook and aspen leaves quivered o'er the brook, by slope and by level ambling on, till day with the sunken sun was gone, and out in the west a sheet of light was lingering pale, pale in the night. At last, as my mare came snorting near my dwelling, where all things near were dear, the apples were swung in darksome balls, and roses hung dark beside the walls. No cows were about the fields to low, the fowls were at roost in sleeping row, and only the rushing owl came by in moon gleamings pale, pale in the sky. Within my old door my lamp was clear to show me the faces, many and dear, my mother's, now dimmed by lifelong care, my wife's as a wife's of 10 years' wear, my children's well shapen line by line, 1 7, 1 5, 1 3 years, mine, and one that has come before our sight, his one moon pale, pale in the night. It depends on the relief from pale in the night, which you get with pale in the sky, but it's not an entire relief when the refrain changes in the middle, because sky has this very, very strong assonance. The by sky rhyme has a strong assonance with the light night, sight night rhyme that's there. You can see that it wouldn't have been difficult, given how an owl proceeds, to have had the word flight. That is, the middle stanza could very easily have been, and only the rushing owl in flight, with moon gleamings pale, pale in the night. I mean, the word hovers. It's a point that Frank Kermode very beautifully made about the Larkin poem At Grass, the way in which another possibility of phrasing is there and is set aside. Something is doffed in the reading, and how often there's that little swerve away from the figure that you might have expected, something either not supplied that you might have expected, or a different thing supplied. It depends, I think, on there being missing from the first stanza the strong opening of the second and third stanza, that is, near dear, clear dear. That is, there is a pattern, but it's a pattern from which the first stanza is exempt in one respect and the second stanza exempt in another respect, and then this extraordinary device through the word one. I find again and again that I can imagine to myself why something is very well written when I imagine a bad creative writing class complaining about it. That is saying, I don't think you should do that. I'm allowed to mention Dylan. William Zanzinger killed poor Hattie Carroll. Don't say poor. It's an immediate invitation to certain kinds of sentimentality and condescension. No, it isn't, because it means she had no money. With a cane that he twirled round his diamond ring finger at a Baltimore Hotel Society gathering, and so on. So that thing which might look as if it's is vulnerable to accusation is exactly what's so good. 1 7. Why do you do this with the numbers and 1? You see, 1 7, 1 5, 1 3 years mine, and one that has come before our sight, his one moon pale. it's immediately open to the objection that it is not promptly lucid because of its use of one in the sense of a person. Isn't that right? One as a child or as a person. One moon is the number, pure and simple. And there's something lovely about the way in which that unity and multiplicity, that one dead child does not weigh more, who lived for only a month, does not weigh more than the others, but needs to be distinguished from the others, is distinguishable but not distinct from the others. And that, I think, is how it moves at the end. Sight is, of course, the rhyme with night and light that allows you to apprehend light and night at all. It's only through sight that light and night mean anything to you. Decisive of recovery or death at the end. Now, if you stay with the moon and what is pale, again in the refrain, here is Oakland. While moonlight shoots with downward stroke on cows that lie beside the oak asleep upon the sloping ground, and rooks all roost with soundless bill within the wood, below the hill in lofty trees by ivy bound, I walk. But what can then be seen? The landscape, pale instead of green. And down below the wood the brook flows rambling on from nook to nook through meads along its pooly track, whereto no cattle come to drink, nor bears the bridge from brink to brink the step of walkers or its back. And what by night can there be seen but willows pale instead of green? But ever fair before my sight the landscape seems by day and night, and through the year at every tide, when white with daisies or with May, or hoarfrost glittering on the spray, or brown with bennets summer dried, or when the oak tree's head is seen with leaves all brown instead of green. But, though so lonely there I stroll, full many shapes before my soul seem one by one to come and go, and one that smiles, unlost from sight, walks here at whiles in evening light, but not in nights of frost or snow, lest I might see with spring o'erhead her cheek ash pale instead of red. Now that move from seen instead of green all the way through, it isn't, I think, that there's anything melodramatic about the change of the refrain. One expects there to be a surprise. But the beauty of it, I think, is the double plaiting of the rhyme, isn't it? That instead has wanted red, because then it will plait at the end with a love knot that is like a wreath, lest I might see with spring o'erhead her cheek ash pale instead of red. And there's some extraordinary ruefulness. It's the relation of what is rueful in a social sense to what it really is to rue things that I think he again and again catches through something which is at once technical and not technical. He doesn't at all mind using the same device more than once. In this respect, he's a writer more like Beckett than he is like some other modern writers. That is, that you will come back repeatedly to a similar turn, seem one by one to come and go, and one that smiles. There's the moment, you see, see what I mean about it being vulnerable, but it is about vulnerability, about the vulnerability in the face of death, and the distinction in the end for an evening. It's very cryptic. Unlost, I think, is wonderfully clear and very strange. It is like, you can see why Hardy loved the poet who could say, unlost from sight. It's not the same as not lost, isn't that right? Unlost. And now a poem where I'll say a little bit more about the pattern, again, of expectations. This is Sister Gone. It's a poem in 3 stanzas, as you will see. The first stanza runs over into the second stanza. It is a poem with 3 people in it, one of whom is nameless and beautifully unself-attended to. And it's about envy and competition and sadness and how love puts them in their place. Sister Gone. When Mary on her wedding day, at last a bride, had gone away from all her friends that there had spent the happy day in merriment, and ringers rang at evenfall their peals of bells from great to small within the tower's mossy wall, so high against the evening sky, then Jane, that there throughout the day had been the gayest of the gay, at last began to hang her head and ponder on her sister fled, and days that seemed too quickly flown to leave her now at home alone, with no one's life to match her own, so sad, though hitherto so glad. It saddened me, that moon-paled night, to see her by the wall in white, while friends departed mate with mate beyond the often swinging gate, as there beside the lilac shade, where golden-chained laburnum swayed, around her face her hair locks played, all black with light behind her back. Extraordinary, that ending to me. It's very cryptic, it's beautifully memorable, very, very difficult to paraphrase. All black with light is such a deep paradox. It's a version of dark with excessive bright, thy skirts appear. Think of what comes and goes. It's called Sister Gone. Think of what comes and goes. The word friends is there in the first verse, and it's there in the last verse, and it is not there in the middle verse, because that is when she most deeply feels friendless. The word at last, or rather the phrase at last, is in the first verse and is in the second verse and is not in the third verse, because the last verse is entirely the element of at last. That is, it doesn't have to say at last. Even these things which are little glints into a world, the novel, as it were, that has not been written by Barnes. He did write a novel, but we don't have it, and I would have liked to have read George Crabbe's novel for some of the same reasons. That feeling with a Larkin poem like Love Songs in Age, that the lyric is an extraordinary compacting of a whole novel, which does not invade the privacy of the woman there or inquire what it was in love that had failed her. When Mary on her wedding day, at last a bride. That is a reminder of the anxieties that hang around the unmarried daughter and so on. When Mary, then Jane, and then the lovely touch, because of so sad, though hitherto so glad, it saddened me. Not too much of an emphasis on me, and nothing more about me at all in what remains. I mean, Barnes is wonderful with the first-person pronoun, but here he subdues it entirely to sympathy. It saddened me. The delicacy of the way in which day gives way to night. When Mary on her wedding day, first line of the first stanza. Then Jane, that there throughout the day, second stanza, third stanza. It saddened me that moon-paled night. But night is not solely lost because of what it gives you at the end, which is the extraordinarily positive use of the phrase behind her back. Behind her back is almost always used to refer to spite and envy and competitiveness and furtiveness, behind her back. Here it is simply literal, but that doesn't mean that you're not to think of the malevolent use of it. The malevolent is invoked only to be held off. Barnes is repeatedly doing that. He loves bringing up, as he loves, for instance, in my opinion, the fact that the word fled could so terribly have been dead. Sister gone could very well lead you towards a poem like We Are Seven, a Wordsworthian sense. And ponder, at last began to hang her head and ponder on her sister fled. That both is and is not a death, isn't that right? This extraordinary feeling that the parting is related to some kind of death of a relationship, which nevertheless one may make you hang your head, but not sort of forever droop your head. The often swinging gait. Notice, for instance, again, I'm thinking about the patterning, the way in which that last stanza has these very, very strong terminations. Night, white, mate, gate, shade, swayed, played, so that back, which is also strongly terminating, unlike day and gay. That day and gay open out, isn't that right? Night closes, as all those words do, and then the very strong assonance, mate, gate, shade, swayed, played. These poets know perfectly well that assonance will again and again be proper in place of rhyme, but they also know that the conjunction of assonance and rhyme can give you a weight and an obduracy that you won't get if you simply have the same rhyme scheme as earlier, isn't that right? Day, gay, head, fled, flown, alone, own, glad is completely different. I mean, sad, glad is completely different from that. Or the assonance in the middle stanza, and days that seem too quickly flown, to leave her now at home, alone, with no one's life to match her own. That sound told through those lines, but again, not, I think, with any underlining. I mean, I'm underlining it and mentioning it to you. You need, as it were, to reconstitute the poem in the privacy of your own home, and so on. That is, what you need is the poem. This is not an occasion on which I think people are moved to tears. There's one poem here that I have difficulty in reading. Something about the lighting, isn't there? And professors talking about it. There are certain apprehensions of the poem that will not come home now, but might come home at home. To leave her now. Now is the word of crisis, repeatedly. Rhyme, Arthur Hallam, Tennyson's friend, said, has been said to contain in itself a constant appeal to memory and hope. Memory, because when you have the second one, you remember the first. Hope, because when you have the first rhyme word, you await with hope the second one. It is paradoxically the recurrence of termination. How can termination recur? And it recurs through the kind of paradox that we have here. Low shot light. Nothing could be simpler as a poem, though it's a learned poem in a respect that I'll mention after reading it. Low shot light. As I went eastward, ere the sun had set, his yellow light on bough by bough was bright. And there by buttercups beside the hill below the elm trees, cow by cow was bright. While after hairy-headed horses' heels with slowly rolling wheels, the plough was bright. And up among the people on the sides, one lovely face with sunny brow was bright. And for that one face, the bough and cow and plough, in my sweet fancy, now are bright. Now, it is how now brown cow. It is the constituents of light verse here beautifully. It's beautifully comic. It's sad too because of the feeling of evanescence, which is in all such light and in all such incipient darkness. I love the way in which the last couplet does not have the word brow in it. I think if I had had the pluck and luck to come up with this as an idea for a poem, I would have made sure that brow maintained itself from the fourth couplet into the fifth, but it doesn't. One lovely face with sunny brow was bright. And for that one. I think, is how we must say it, because its main sense is forever, but it is powerfully affirmative. That is, on the page, it also likes the fact that AYE is a positive affirmation, pronounced I, of course. But it, too, is a now poem. Dick Davis, in his very good anthology of translations from Persian poetry, Borrowed Where, Medieval Persian Epigrams, identified, and I hadn't known this, identified the particular device here called in Persian the radif. That is, Persian poems often rhyme 3 or 4 syllables before the end of the line. The last syllables of the line are then taken up with a phrase called in Persian the radif that is repeated each time the rhyme recurs. And he has a footnote pointing out that Barnes was aware of the radif from his study of Persian, and he too experimented with it in a few poems. He quotes Kipling as doing it. That is, you rhyme across the waste of it with the better haste of it, and you do that in a poem that is not comical or frivolous or flippant. That is, the ordinary association of that rhyming, Davis believes, I think rightly, is with lightness and buoyancy, not with the kind of gravity which is in low shot light for all the lightness of it. Here are a couple of such poems from Dick Davis. They're 4 lines long, and you'll see the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam stanza form. Who has remained so long outside love's door like me, and suffered in his heart your scorn before like me? I do not curse the man who came between us, I only wish him to be more and more like me. Now, that unit, the unit you see, is one that would lend itself, I think, to comedy. Brilliant in the original, I believe, and certainly in Davis's translation. The fact that I do not curse the man who came between us is the unrhyming line that comes between the lines that rhyme, so that it is doing that of which it speaks. And the same is true with this also from Dick Davis. The time of flowers and every pleasant sight has come. The one thing that would never turn out right has come. Whatever made you disregard my love has gone. Now winter's gone, the season of delight has come. So the rhyme is not sight, right, delight, but sight has come, right has come, delighters come. And then again, the line that is not rhymed being actually unrhymed. Whatever made you disregard my love has gone. And something has gone, sister gone, something has gone from the rhyme scheme itself. Here is Shellbrook, which you will see has the radif in it, Shellbrook. And I think my point here again is one to do with expectation. I would have expected such a poem to be unable to be so grave as this is in its evocation of lost happiness. Shellbrook. When out at Shellbrook round by stile and tree, with longer days and sunny hours come on, with spring and all its sunny showers come on, with May and all its shining flowers come on, how merry with young folk met in glee. And there how we in merry talk went by the foam below the river bay, all white, and blossom on the green-leaved May, all white, and chalk beside the dusty way, all white, where glittering water matched with blue the sky. Or else in winding paths and lanes, along the wooded hillocks sloping steep we roamed, or down the dells and dingles deep we roamed, or by the bending brook's wide sweep we roamed on holidays, with merry laugh or song. But now the frozen churchyard wallings keep the patch of tower-shaded ground all white, where friends can find the frosted mound, all white, with turfy sides upswelling round, all white, with young off sundered from the young in sleep. The surprise at the end, I think, being not that the young in death are off sundered from the old, but that they're off sundered from the young. That's the moment. I mean, there's a kind of generosity, I think, in the imagining that's here. It's got a complicated scheme, hasn't it? That is, the first stanza, hours come on, showers come on, flowers come on. The second, all white, all white, all white. As in the last, all white, all white, all white. So you ask yourself why it moves in and out of that shape. It does a lot with twos and with 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. That's one way of subdividing it. Another is, of course, is that it's two pairs, isn't that right? Because the A is followed by B, and then C is followed by B, isn't that right, in terms of the larger rhyme scheme that's happening. It starts with the radif having words that, in Tennyson's phrase, hover between one syllable and two syllable, he says, like a dreamy child of the two. Hours and showers and flowers will not settle down in English to being either one syllable or two syllables. They have this strange fluidity in them, unlike bay and may and way, and very unlike steep and deep and sweep, and very unlike ground and mound and round. But notice how that rhyme steep, deep, sweep keeps its life in the poem because it's then the next rhyme. But now the frozen churchyard wallings keep. So steep, deep and sweep become the final rhymes that open the last stanza and that close it, sundered from the young in sleep. I think, since Barnes is very minute as a poet, that he relishes the difference between W and WH. That is, W does not fully alliterate with WH. At my school, you were in danger of a beating if you said that Moby Dick was about a white whale. It wasn't. It was about a white whale, all right? And if you look at how this works, for instance, a line like, let's get it, and chalk beside the dusty way, all white. It's not way all white. Do you see what I mean? There's a breathing that he loves getting into these, and of course you get it particularly when you move into Dorset poems where the spelling is more largely intended to be phonetic and to register breathing in this way. Hopkins, very, very beautifully, I don't know if he had this poem in mind, talking about Barnes's epithets and images and their native air, says that they have a keeping. And he underlines that, have a keeping which nothing else could give. But now the frozen churchyard wallings keep the patch. And that line ending, as you step across, you have to keep it, don't you? Keep is not the termination. You have to reach through into the next line and keep and hold something. The things that come and go from it are the way in which merry is in the first stanza, and merry is in the second stanza, and merry is in the third stanza, and merry is not in the last stanza. These are things which you can register without being conscious of them. You read Keats's To Autumn, and you will register that 3 seasons are mentioned and not the 4th, winter. You will register that whether you are conscious of it or not, and the one that is the potent absence, the absence of the word merry, like the absence of the word friends before. I'll pass over on the road and say only this about it, leave it to you if I may. Its extraordinary use of the para rhyme, which I associate with bad omen, not good omen. And I do that because for me, as I think for many readers, Wilfred Owen's Strange Meeting was the first poem that we understood as rotating rhyme into para rhyme. Groaned into groined, hall into hell. That rotation is the opposite of a rhyme, but it's a kind of rhyme. I'd always thought of it, therefore, as darkly ominous, not, in Keats's very beautiful phrase, ominous of good. But Barnes is able to use it very extraordinarily. If you just look at the 4th line of On the Road, and the stubble of wheat fields was withering white, where wheat goes into white, where filled in the next verse goes into fall, where steep goes into step, or in the I'll just read the last verse. There the horse pranced along with his neck a high bow, and up tossed his broad nose over outspringing knees, and the ox with sleek hide and with a low swinging head, and the sheep little kneed with a quick dipping nod, and a girl with her head carried on in a proud gait of walking, as smooth as an air-swimming cloud. She doesn't need those internal rhymes of that kind, but the sheep little need, K-N-E-E-D, with a quick dipping nod, it's that device which I think he picks up in part from the King James Bible. The King James Bible is full of these very, very beautiful, benign turns with such rhyme. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. That's the turn. Let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, from lad to Lord, but died in his own sin and had no son. That move. Why hath the Lord done thus unto this? There's a strange feeling that there's something providential in these turns, and providential can fortunately be sometimes benign. I'll say one more general point, and then I'll read one more poem, and then I will stop. The general point has to do with intention, and I apologise to friends of mine, several of whom are here, for telling an anecdote again about intention. That is, if it is put to me, is Barnes conscious of these effects? The answer from my point of view can perfectly well be that he was not necessarily conscious of them, but that nevertheless he created them, because I think artists are people who combine the instinctual with the trained in the way in which athletes do. And the athlete knows exactly how long that ball will take to reach his hands, except he could not put a figure on it. He could not tell you how many seconds it is, and he could not, until it happens, describe what moves him to have so done it, to have been so successful. So that for me, there are such things as unconscious intentions, which doesn't mean that anything goes. You have to give grounds from the rest of the person's work, from things that are in the air, for believing this is possible. So my anecdote, which some of you will have heard, concerns Oliver Franks, later Lord Franks, the Provost of Worcester College, Oxford, when I was a Fellow of the College. He had taken a cut of 90% of his salary as chairman of Lloyd's Bank to come to the college. We were paying him 1/10 of his salary, and he got up at the first Old Members' Weekend, and he said, I have been here only a short time, and I still have a very great deal to learn. Now, Oliver Franks was a man of Roman dignity. He would never in a million years have done anything so vulgar as remind the college of the immense financial sacrifice he had made. Nevertheless, some part of him wished to remind the college of the immense financial sacrifice he had made. And he did this through the L at the end of deal, the fiscal sense of the word deal, and the possibility that only the L stood between earn and learn. Been here a very short time and I still have a great deal to learn. I heard it for two reasons. One is that I had voted against him as provost and was therefore listening to what he said, unlike the people who were basking in approbation of him and not needing to listen. And at the same time, I was interested in the intentional fallacy and in arguments about authors' intentions and the different forms that intention might take. So I do believe that whether consciously deliberated, these effects are truly there, and that one of the things that Larkin so loved and that Hardy so loved, his ingenious internal rhymes, subtle juxtaposition of kindred lipping endings and vowel sounds. That is there irrespective of whether it was consciously deliberated. Now, I have been putting before you poems in what Barnes variously calls national or common English. I've not put before you poems in the Dorset dialect, not because I don't read them with pleasure. I believe that I can hear them in the theatre of my head, truly voiced. It's true that I have tapes by Alan Chedzoy, who's recorded them beautifully, and also by Margaret Mitchell, Maureen Mitchell, I beg your pardon, and her husband, who have kindly recorded them and let me listen to them. But I can't render them for you. That is, I'm so self-conscious in doing and in not getting in some awful BBC sort of, so I do so, and so on. I can't do any of that without kind of terrible self-consciousness. There are great poems that are not in the dialect, and I hope you think that the poems I put before you deserve and reward attention. But I will close not with... I've given you two poems. One is the poem I'm going to call Lonesomeness, which I shall not read to you, partly because it's in the Dorset dialect and partly because it is voiced by a woman. It is an extremely fine poem, I think a wonderful, desolate poem, a great plea that never says please and doesn't need to. I've written about it in an essay on loneliness and poetry, because that, I think, is one of Barnes's great subjects. But I want to read the turnstile, which I will simply render into national English, and I will say almost nothing about it. It rhymes 2 by 2. There are 2 parents. There are 4 arms. It moves very extraordinarily. It needs the word child as a word for which there is no pictorial equivalent. That is, no painting can be a painting of a child without obfuscating the sex or gender of the child. The word child does not obfuscate it, it simply does not tell you. Very difficult to paint a child. What you will have painted is a boy or a girl. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm not saying it can't ever be done, but it's exceptionally difficult to do, especially in the foreground. Do you know what I mean? That is, back in the distance, they could be children, but if they're in the foreground, as this absent child is, the turnstile, as I say, rendered in a way that takes a good deal from it, but not, I think, too much. Ah, sad we were as we did pace the old church road with downcast face, the while the bells that moaned so deep above our child are left asleep, were now a-singing all alive with t'other bells to make the 5. But up at one place we come by, 'twere hard to keep one's 2 eyes dry. On Staincliff Road, within the throng, up where as folk do pass along, the turnstile, a painted white, do sheen by day and show by night. For always there, as we did go to church, this style did let us through, with spreaden arms that wheeled to guide us, each in turn to t'other side. And first of all the train he took my wife, with winsome gait and look, and then sent on my little maid, a-skipping onward, overjoyed to reach again the place of pride, her comely mother's left-hand side. And then a-wheeling round he took on me within his 3rd white nook, and in the 4th, a-shaking wild, he sent us on our giddy child. But yesterday he guided slow my downcast Jenny full of woe, and then my little maid in black, a-walking softly on her track. And after he'd turned again to let me go along the lane, he had no little boy to fill his last white arms, and they stood still. Thank you.
I promised you intellectual exhilaration. I feel we've heard about 10 lectures in the last. We've been taken in so many directions with so many things to think about. And also, we brought almost to tears at the end. It was made it both memorable and makes it quite difficult for me to say anything now, except the very warmest thanks for this wonderful talk.